So since the pandemic, there has been significant impact on people and business. There are multiple discussions, blogs, articles, and podcasts about the next normal of work and what this means for employers and employees. One particular area that has been impacted is human resources. We are seeing more businesses and leaders asking for advice and support to guide them through the new normal of work, to be able to retain their staff, accelerate performance, and deliver results in what has now become the new normal. To understand more about the impact and focus on human resources, I'm speaking today with HR expert Clare Long. Now, Clare is the founder and director of Norgay HR. Clare and a team at Norgay HR run the human resources function for small to medium-sized businesses, having advised over 500 business owners and leaders on thousands of HR questions, issues, challenges, and strategies. The team at Norgay HR are well equipped to help business owners and leaders get the people piece right. Now, Clare and I have actually spoken many times in the recent months about the rapid increase in questions and requests for support, specifically around the new normal of work. So welcome, Clare. It's lovely to have you with me today.
Thanks, Vanessa. Thanks so much for having me.
So Clare, let me ask you, COVID has been a major catalyst for the workplace change. And we keep hearing this term, the next normal of the workplace. Can you start by giving us an overview of these changing dynamics and what they mean for businesses?
Sure. Well, I think the most obvious one, and one we had to adopt pretty quickly, was that our home became our office. We had to move to that working arrangement very quickly and really with very little notice. And that was at the beginning of the pandemic last year. I think that's had some benefits, and I think it's also had some challenges. So from last year, we surveyed our clients 3 or 4 times to really check in on the well-being of people and how well those remote working relationships were working. And initially, everyone was really excited and very positive. You know, I don't have to travel into work. I've got more flexibility. I'm really enjoying working from home. But as the year went on, what we found was the sentiment changed a bit. And it was, you know what, we kind of missed connecting with our colleagues. We think that diversity of thought, perhaps, or building solutions might have been negatively impacted. And we found that people were kind of landing on a desire for a hybrid working relationship. So a bit of both. They wanted to go into the office. They wanted that feeling of connection with their colleagues in particular, but they also wanted that flexibility. And I think that definitely is going to become a standard or a new normal, if you like, in terms of work relationships going forward. The benefits, as I've mentioned, flexibility, the employee experience improved a lot, generally speaking, but we also saw some downside, and it came down to a couple of things. So the type of business. We have one of our, or a few clients actually, who work in the creative space. So they really rely in that diversity of ideas, and particularly creative ideas, to come up with optimum solutions for their clients. It's a bit hard to do that via Zoom.
Yeah.
So that doesn't work well for every industry. The other sector where I found there was some challenges, people that were new to a business. So they hadn't yet been able to form those personal relationships that, it's much easier to form those when you're sitting in an office with your colleagues or you're heading out for coffee with your colleagues. When you don't have the opportunity to do that, I think those personal relationships were impacted. And I strongly believe the strength of relationships is very key to the outcomes you get through people.
Yeah.
So I think that there could be something lost there. And I think also, and certainly this was a huge area of concern, I would say across the board with all of our clients, some people just don't do well on their own. There are introverted personality types who kind of, I mean, it's a broad generalization, but again, that connection piece is really important to them, and they may struggle to find that via a Zoom type meeting or any other type of meeting. So definitely benefits in terms of flexibility, the overall employee experience. I definitely think it's going to remain a new norm in terms of what people are looking for in a work structure or a work approach. But I also think the connection piece people are looking for as well.
Yeah. What kind of strategies have you been helping your clients specifically regarding these points you just mentioned?
Yeah, so we've seen a big increase in a couple of things. It's kind of, you know, the fun stuff that again gets back to building the relationship. So, for example, like thinking of one of our clients that we've been working with now for about 2 or 3 years, actually, end of 2019, and they've put in place a fortnightly 5 o'clock drinks on a Friday. Now, most of our clients are doing things like that, but so I think if everyone's connecting more at that relationship level, and those sessions are very informal. It's not the CEO talking about the results and all that kind of stuff. Yep, that stuff's there. It's important to know that. But there's very much a focus on, you know, how's your week been? You know, there's kids in the background, and that's all okay. That's all, again, become very normal. And our work lives and our home lives are very much more blended, I think, more than I've ever seen before.
Yeah.
You know, one of our other clients, an engineering firm, he, you know, this is a guy we've been working with for some time. And, you know, he said to me, I call everyone every week. So he's got about 30 or 40 staff, everyone every week. And I just spend 10 minutes in their lounge room. And I thought, you know what, that is so great. So again, connecting at a different level. He said, I'm just checking in to see how they're going, how their week's gone. Because I think this was true in the early days, maybe less so now, but, you know, this kind of getting out of bed at 7 or 7:30, just jumping in front of your computer, and the next thing you know, it's 7 or 7:30 in the evening. That's very problematic.
Yeah.
So there's been a strong encouragement to build into your work days, exercise, you know, time out of work, like all those breaks that you would generally have experienced in your normal workday, build those into your remote working lives as well. So there's been quite a big focus on that. The other thing is we're looking for fun team activities. So we've had some clients where we've introduced them to a quiz master, right? So they're running trivia, which is great fun. We're also looking at, you know, we've always worked with a team of counsellors that we've been able to pull in on an as-needs basis. You know, our requests for that have been increasing, particularly in this second round of lockdowns.
Yeah.
But there's also another program that we're about to run with one of our clients. So we've sourced a provider of workshop on, and it's not when you're at the point that you need a counsellor, but it's when you're at the point where you are experiencing some stress and you just need some strategies to deal with that. And that's going to be an all of business workshop. So they're the sorts of things. We've got a hamper company that we work with to send out hampers, you know, those sorts of, again, all strategies and ideas to increase connectedness at quite a personal level.
It kind of sounds like it's bringing the human back into human resources.
I completely agree. I completely agree. This focus on relationships has been one of the greatest shifts, I think, that I've seen. And, you know, we're really lucky with the clients that we work with as well. Without actually all of them really have got or strive to build high trust environments. So they're not asking us questions about, well, how do we know they're doing the right thing? How do we know they're not, you know, just out walking or running all day? We don't get those questions. I'm not so sure that that's the case in larger corporates. I think the culture is so critically key to how well businesses are dealing with this current situation. And staff, it's important to staff as well.
Absolutely. You mentioned the word trust just a moment ago. Do you think that people's perception of trust is different in the current environment compared to what it was pre-pandemic?
I definitely think there's more of a focus on it. So again, going back to, you know, the feedback processes that we run, now we've increased the frequency of those, and it is definitely a fundamental aspect of those feedback questions is checking in on trust in management, and trust and confidence in leadership. What we found pleasingly with all of our clients is that the trust is actually pretty high. People have felt that their well-being is front and center. And I think this is, I think more than ever, health and well-being of teams is it's top of mind, definitely amongst our clients for sure. And they're feeling that.
Absolutely. You mentioned just a minute ago about your clients have a lot of questions. Can you talk us through some of the questions or concerns that your clients are discussing with you in the current environment?
Sure. In the early days, again, I'll go back to the beginning of last year, it was pretty chaotic there when with high levels of anxiety, as you can imagine, the businesses in our sector were hit pretty hard and hit pretty early. So we were advising about 6 weeks before JobKeeper was even announced. And in those days, it was all, the advice was all around, look, we need to reduce salary costs. How do we do that? And we went right into consultation mode to reduce, because at that time you could only reduce salary costs through reducing the hours, which you needed to do by mutual consent. So that was really, that was a very chaotic time for our clients. And one of the things as a business owner myself that, I had to, well, we all did, we're a team of 5 here in Australia. We had to go right back to our own values. One of our values in this business is calm is contagious. So no matter what we were presented with, and remember, we were advising in an environment with incomplete information often, and where the information was changing daily. The last thing our clients needed to feel from us that we were anxious and stressed. So we put in place a couple of things to kind of help us get through it, but this calm is contagious value was never more evident than it was at the beginning of last year. So the beginning of last year was all about, what can I do? How do you help me execute on the decisions that I must make to keep this business going? So that was back then. I think as we got more and more used to it, the questions changed, and it became less about survival, I guess, because we kind of got through that phase. Yeah. And more, again, as I mentioned, the well-being of our teams, that became front and center. Can you check in and see how everyone's going? There are people working remotely. How's that working from a family situation? How's that working from a technology situation? So again, we ran a lot of feedback processes last year to deal with that. So the other questions that we get a lot of, again, it goes back to leadership, it goes back to issue management. How can we help resolve something that might be going on that wasn't going on in the past? I mean, there's no doubt that the performance of some people slipped because they just had too much going on in their life to be able to be as productive as they generally were. But, across the board, our leaders all understood that and they expected it. And in fact, when we check in with them, they would all say that productivity didn't really suffer dramatically, or not to the extent that they anticipated that it might. So I think that's quite telling on the resilience of business owners and the resilience of employees. I feel that, and I felt this from the very beginning, everyone was just keen to do what they could do to get through this. Yeah. And I think that's as true in our personal lives as it is in our work lives as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You mentioned a few times about employee well-being, and I have found that the conversation of psychological safety and employer well-being is probably one of the most talked about subjects in the workplace at the moment. What's your advice for businesses wanting to improve the well-being of their employees?
Well, I think the first thing you want to do is ask them how they're going and ask them how they're feeling. So I think there's the well-being and there's the psychological safety bit. Yep. So the well-being, there's no doubt that the anxiety levels have increased and people are dealing with, stuff at home as well as work and trying to juggle all of that. And that juggle, that can be really tough for people. So checking in, I think, is really important. The psychological safety piece, though, I see that as related, but also a little bit different. And I think Adam Grant does some great stuff around this. And I think even with the psychological safety, it actually comes down to the very culture, or one of the important aspects of the culture that you want to try and build within your business. And again, I'd be measuring it. And you don't have to do anything formal in terms of a measurement mechanism, although I definitely would include it in your feedback processes. But you can sense from your own team whether they feel comfortable to speak up.
Yeah.
Right. So the things that people are afraid to say when they don't believe they're in a psychologically safe environment, they're afraid to say things like, I don't know, I made a mistake, I disagree, I could be wrong, I have a concern, I have an idea. If your team members are saying those things, you may have a problem. If they're not saying those things, it's probably just a quick and easy way to work out whether you are creating the environment you're hoping to create, where people feel like they can speak up safely without repercussions.
It sounds like it really connects to what you were saying before about trust in the leadership. Because if you have the trust, then you have a certain level of psychological safety there.
Completely. And that I think it's an incredibly important aspect of a cultural value that you want to build within your business, because otherwise you're going to have all of the answers. If people don't feel like they can speak up around new ideas, if they don't feel like they can try things and fail, but learn from that failure, you're going to have all the answers. And at some point, as businesses grow, you can't be the only one that has all of the answers. That will impede your growth. You want to be employing smart people who feel like they can speak up and contribute freely.
Absolutely. What advice would you give to somebody when they've listened to this that they can go and implement straight away, from the two separate aspects, psychological safety and employee wellbeing?
Well, I think feedback process, and a feedback process can be a simple SurveyMonkey process, just get the questions right. Or, there's another company that we happen to work with actually that I think do a fabulous job. And so we do recommend them to the clients that have the budget. So ask people how they're feeling. I think what helps, because for many of our clients, they're running these processes for the first time when they start working with us. What we have found helpful is being able to say to teams, look, this is a confidential process. It's being run by our HR partner, and we're using this particular tool. So there seems to be a bit of safety in that. Well, okay, so I'm not going to be able to be identified. I can speak freely. I think that is absolutely the first place to start. In fact, I think getting that insight is the first place to start on organizational wide change, but also individual change and team change, particularly for a leadership team. Go ask them how they're feeling about those aspects, their well-being, and how comfortable are they to speak up. And it's interesting, we ran one of our fintech clients, we ran their first engagement survey last year, and I presented the results to the board. And I'll never forget one of the questions that came from the chairman. He said, how do we know people feel free to speak up? And I was able to go and say, well, this question, this question, this question, this result, this result, this result, this would say to me, people feel free to speak up in this environment. No one's hiding stuff that shouldn't be going on. So it was great. It was great to be able to actually give that response.
Well, firstly, that's a great question for the chairman to have asked.
Yes, I agree.
And that really shows that you're leading from the top in that instance. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, completely. Mm.
So what's your advice for businesses who really want to keep their teams motivated while in this particular situation where workforces are more geographically dispersed? And from what you're saying, being in the hybrid environment, moving forward in the new normal, the geographical disbursement will continue.
Keep them challenged, keep them inspired, and keep them valued. And you know what? The manager has such a critical role to play in all three. So don't assume that your managers know how to do this stuff naturally. I think more than ever, we should be investing in upskilling our people leaders, team leaders, to actually do those three things, to keep their people challenged, inspired, and feeling valued. And I think that should be a huge focus for businesses, is to kind of delegate that leadership and yet equip their people leaders to actually be people leaders.
They're great points to challenge, inspire, and show that you value them.
Yeah.
What is your one tip for somebody to walk away from this podcast, for them to know how can they challenge, value, and inspire?
Build a relationship. As I said before, the strength of your interpersonal relationships is so critical to the outcomes you get. It's so critical. Absolutely. So get some insight into how strong those relationships are. Be honest about where the gaps are, and then it's absolutely up to leaders to close those gaps or get the help they need to close those gaps. I'm working with one of our CEOs at the moment, and I was having a conversation with him just in the last month, and he's relatively new as a CEO, so he's been at it for a few years, but he has come to me to say, look, I really think in order for me to take this business through its next phase of growth, I need some professional development. I would like to work with a business coach. I'm reporting to a board. I would like to get some professional development to help me through some of those business challenges that inevitably occur through growth. Who can you introduce me to? So I think when when it's being led from the top like that, it makes it so much easier for the people reporting to him in this case to think, well, that's great, that's good role model. I'd like some of that too. So yeah. You can't get good outcomes if your interpersonal relationships aren't strong. You're just not going to get the outcomes that you could get. So focus on that.
Yeah. You're so right. And a lot of conversations I have with executives is that there's a common theme that there is a lot of investment, training and upskilling from junior all the way through to senior management. But the minute you get into a senior management, director, C-suite, or even into that CEO position, there isn't as much focus and investment in your own development. And you're right, that is where executive coaching and business coaching, having that one-on-one impact, can really make a difference to those people in the senior management and leadership.
I completely agree. That CEO and MD role, those senior level roles can be kind of lonely, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
If you haven't got someone who's brave enough to kind of give you feedback, but of course you need to give them permission to do that as well. Talk about psychological safety. You're not going to want to be shooting the messenger if you've asked them to give you feedback and then you're unwilling to take it. But there's also, the structure that can be applied to that process as well. I would never start that process without doing some type of feedback process on yourself. So whether that's what we call a 360-degree feedback process, where you're getting feedback from your peers, you're getting feedback from above, and you're getting feedback from people that report through to you to give you the insight that you need to start on that change process.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a good point. Now, one thing I personally see a lot in my work is businesses experiencing a war on talent. And that is another common trend or statement that's been made at the moment. Why is attracting employees with the right skill set so important? And what strategies should businesses have to capture these people?
Look, certainly in the sector we're working in, so the small to medium scale up sector, that, the old term, the war for talent, it's back with a vengeance. So, we've got borders that are closed. We used to rely so heavily on people coming into Australia to kind of close or help us close that skills gap. We don't have that at the moment. It's really presenting a huge challenge, certainly for our clients, and more as well, I'd say the fintech or the tech space in particular. So if you're out there competing for skills that everybody else is competing for, you better be differentiating yourself in your offer. Money's one thing. To me, money has always been a hygiene factor. You just have to meet the market, and that's that. Now, you can do some pretty interesting things with REM structures and, around ownership and short-term incentives and long-term incentives. And I think, there's opportunity to be looking at those areas quite creatively. But I think, again, I'm going to go back to the 3 points I made before. If you're not providing an environment where people are challenged, where they're inspired, or where they're feeling valued, they'll go find it somewhere else. So you need to really differentiate yourself. We spoke before about the remote working model or a hybrid working model. I think that's become a bit of a hygiene factor now in Australia. I mean, you'd have a perspective on that, I'm sure. I think it's just a given now. People are looking for flexibility. So I think that the last best place to focus on is differentiating yourself around the environment you're creating within your business. I'll tell a story about another one of our clients that it's really interesting, actually. They're a very innovative business and they've grown remarkably in the last 4 years because of their innovative culture and because of their ability to take really good calculated risks. But they're really good at working out what could go wrong and mitigating around that. And they've brought in a team to their business recently who's come from quite a different environment, sort of more of a corporate environment. Okay. And the differences in the thinking is so interesting. And so we're working really hard and very deliberately to make quite a mindset change or a mind shift from, coming from this environment where you had to ask permission for everything to then now moving into an innovative environment where we're saying, no, just go give it a go. Give it a go. What's the worst thing that can happen? Calculated risk taking is a good thing. It's really interesting to me because I do love this whole area around organizational culture. It's really interesting to me to see those differences. And I know we'll get there because we're addressing it right up front. We're saying, no, you don't have to do that anymore. This is how we do things here. So can you imagine for someone who's looking for their next role, what sort of environment do you think they're going to want to work in? The kind of bureaucratic, rule-abiding one, or the one that gives them the freedom to be creative and really be challenged and really be inspired and motivated?
And therefore be valued.
Completely. Yeah, feel valued, of course, yeah.
So how would an employee know, and on the flip side, how can an employer communicate what their culture is so they can be differentiated in the market?
It's a really good question and not an easy one to answer. The only way you're really going to know, although I must say it's easier now with social media and you can do a lot more research around culture, values, and it's one thing to say all this stuff, but is it actually being lived out in the workplace? That can be challenging to get a real view on that unless you know somebody within that workplace or you do your homework. There's companies like Glassdoor who provide reviews. I don't know what your view is on that, but I don't know. For me, if I were looking, I'd be looking for people who work within those businesses to ask those questions of, because of course, in an interview situation, you are going to be presented with the best light in terms of how things work around there. Right. It's not until you get in there, though, that you really can understand the true cultural aspects of that environment. And, that is a tricky one. I'm not sure that's ever been any different. Being able to get a really good feel for culture, it'll come somewhat through the recruitment process. You might, so here's an example, I guess, if the recruitment process is really long and drawn out and you're meeting with millions of people and you're still in the same process 2 months later, maybe that tells you something about how quickly they get things done, how agile that business is. If the recruitment process runs, smoothly over a reasonable period of time that recognizes that you are a valuable asset that we actually want to bring into this business, and we know you've probably got many other options, that might give you a different perspective. I guess that's one hint.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And you make some good comments about social media and other companies like Glassdoor. I always suggest to people it's multifaceted. There are so many platforms to look at. Don't just look at one, look at all of them. but there is nothing more valuable than hearing it from the people who work there. They're the ones who are experiencing it. So you can have all the communication out there, but that's one perspective. Actually hearing it from people is going to be one of the most important things. And the recruitment process, as you mentioned, is a really important way to find out. If they say on social media, we are really good at communicating and we value everybody who comes into contact with us, and then they don't communicate very well or they don't respond very well during the recruitment process, that's saying that there's something wrong there. There's two different sides to the story. So the consistency on each of those different channels is really important.
I completely agree. Agree.
So are there any other critical workplace trends that businesses should be aware of?
Look, I think some of the trends I've seen in the HR space, actually, particularly over the last 12 months, I think there's been quite a big uptake in technology, so HR technology, whether it's a HR platform that, you know, manages your obligations from a legislative perspective, for example. So that kind of deals with risk mitigation, if you like. So have we got everything in place that we should have in place, and are we operating in accordance with the various legislative frameworks that are constantly changing? So I definitely think there's been an uptake in that type of technology to help manage and mitigate that risk. The other technology platforms, though, that I've seen huge uptake in, again, is the feedback platforms, you know, the employee engagement type platforms. You know, the company we happen to recommend, I know, had a 300% growth last year.
Wow.
Phenomenal business, by the way. So I'm definitely seeing a huge uptake in HR information systems. Even onboarding platforms, there's some really great contemporary onboarding platforms that are available now, and that particularly focus on onboarding people during remote and hybrid working situations. So high touch points, you know, across not just the HR partner, but also the management team and what have you. So that's been a trend, which I think is great. Obviously, as we've spoken about, the health and wellbeing of team members is front and center, more than I've ever seen it before. So what can we do to help people cope with this? You know, we've certainly had an increase in requests for counsellors, but also something in between counsellors, whether it's team-based activities, workshops, webinars, learning. There's been a lot more of a focus on online learning, to kind of break that day, that pattern. So build into your work day some time out to do some online learning. There's some really good online learning platforms that have come to surface, and not just about work related stuff either. You know, I was talking to, I still maintain pretty good connections with and friendships with actually my old HR director network. And I was just caught up with those guys last night, and one of them was telling me about this great platform that they're about to introduce into their business, which I'm going to look at as well. And it does provide learning opportunities, but it's across all things. It's not just job related. Okay. It's actually cooking. It's learning how to do all sorts of things, you know, cook with Neil Perry, get tennis lessons from, you know, famous tennis players, those sorts of things, which I think is kind of fun. So that rise in technology, I think, has been one of the biggest trends I've seen in the last 12 to 18 months. And of course, focused on wellbeing.
You mentioned about onboarding, and if it's okay, I just want to go back to your onboarding comment. I do tend to find that onboarding's the overlap between the recruitment process and really the beginning of that strong relationship with your new employee. But I also find it's actually one of the areas that's not focused on enough in the relationship with an employee. What kind of recommendations would you give people about remote onboarding?
So I completely agree with you. And even before we went into a remote working environment, you know, if that's not done well, you can lose somebody very quickly from an engagement perspective. You know, it's the old story, I turn up and I didn't have a laptop, right? It's just, you know, you go through so much and you put so much time and energy into recruiting somebody, finding them, recruiting them, selecting them, and then you get them on day one and you drop them. That's how it feels when that's not done well. So I think certainly when we're onboarding our team members, we jump in. We don't get involved in recruitment, but we definitely come in when somebody is being made a job offer. So, the first thing we do is connect. Again, I go back to connecting. They get the phone call. This is who I am. I'm your HR business partner. You're shortly going to receive a link. And within that link, you'll find your contract, you'll find your policy handbook. People are really excited to get that stuff before they come through the door. So all of that's already done before they come through the door. All of, the paperwork's all done, everything's ready. And then we've put together, in fact, we did this pre-pandemic, we've made a few changes, but not vastly. We worked from a really good Gallup study, actually, on the importance of onboarding people properly. And we have created a bit of a structure on which involves multiple key points and stakeholders within the business. So what are we going to do week 1? What are we going to do week 2 and week 3? And beyond, in fact, we look at onboarding as being really a 3-month process. So, and including lots of different touch points within the business. So I think that's really important. I think what is becoming more important, and something we need to build more into our own process right now, because of the remote nature of the way we're working, is back to the old, the old buddying system. Yes. Connect somebody with someone just like them or almost like them, so they can ask those questions. How do things get done around here? So again, I know I keep going back to relationships, but I do think it's so important. Giving them somebody that they can form a working relationship with that becomes a friendship that they can reach out to during those, those first few months of working with a new employer, particularly when they're doing so remotely.
Kind of like having the buddy systems, like a mentoring program as well.
Yeah, I always think of mentoring. I think buddying is a bit more informal. I always feel that mentoring is more about knowledge transfer.
Yeah.
Whereas buddying is kind of, if you think about it, who do I ask all the stupid questions of? Because I'm certainly not going to ask my manager. How does that look? Mind you, we do, we always say to our new team members as well, we play that role for you as well. Like, no question's a dumb question. So they can ask us that as well. But I do think that's probably something that's required even in our own process right now, a bigger focus on that.
Another topic that's come up with onboarding that I've been talking to a lot of people, a lot of women in particular, and women in leadership, that there seems to be such a fantastic focus on onboarding of new employees, but not so much a focus on onboarding parents who are coming back from parental leave. And somebody might be on parental leave for 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months, and they're just coming straight back in as if they were there yesterday. How much of a focus are you finding on the onboarding of people coming back from parental leave or secondments in the current environment?
Look, I think we've always had a focus on that. Now, it probably comes from the fact that, all 5 of us are working parents. In my own business, all of us work a flexible work week. That's one of the differentiators I had as part of my hiring strategy. And we all have a great desire to be able to balance our work lives with what's going on at home. So I think with that, being the type of people that we are, and where that is very important to us, it'll naturally transfer over to our clients. So whenever any of our clients, and if we talk about people going off on parental leave, it's a really good example. There's always the opportunity for them to stay connected into the business to the extent that they want to. Because one of the things I find, particularly if you're having your first child, but even if you're having your second or your fourth, in my case, you just don't know what that's going to be like until that happens, right? Yeah. So, but you are welcome to connect to the extent that you would like to be involved. Obviously, as somebody's coming into the workplace, they do have the right to ask for a flexible work arrangement. And certainly where that can be provided, that does happen, whether it's for a short period of time or a longer period of time. Now, that being said, there are businesses that just cannot support that. And I think that's particularly true of the smaller businesses. But where it can be, where we feel it can be supported, we will certainly be swaying or providing that advice. It's a good strategy, particularly given your comment before about skill shortages and the competitive nature of the resource marketplace out there. It's a way to differentiate.
That is very true. So can you talk us through the role of HR in particular in helping us navigate through the dynamics that we've been talking about, both for the businesses and the individuals?
Yeah, look, the sector we work in, as you mentioned in the introduction, we work predominantly, or actually solely, in the small to medium and scale up sector. And I think there, a really common entry point for us is when business owners are getting to the point of growth where they're starting to, number one, spend too much time on HR, particularly the compliance part of HR. The legislation is tricky to navigate. It is changing a lot. I actually think businesses can sometimes get really bad press around mistakes that they've made. And if I think about, the wages theft scandal reported in the press, and I think we started hearing about that in 2019, I remember thinking at the time, and again, in the context of the clients we work with, there might be another side to that story. There's no doubt there'll be businesses or business owners who set out to do the wrong thing. But I also have the view that perhaps things are so complicated that even the big end of town is struggling to get it right. So I think for small to medium businesses, having that HR partner, first of all, focus on those risk areas and mitigating any risk on that is really important. But that's only part of the story. And there are lots of, there are other models that are similar to ours and different to ours that can meet that need pretty well. I think where, though, and again, coming back to everything we've talked about, when you're operating in an environment where there's a huge skill shortage and competition for the resources out there, you need to be able to differentiate yourself. And we feel the best way to differentiate yourself is when you put in place things like performance and career development programs, when you're fostering a culture where there's a continuous conversation. Again, creating that environment. I'm going to go back to the 3 points again, where people feel challenged, they feel inspired, and they feel valued.
Yeah.
And I think that is needed just as much in small to medium scale-up businesses, if not more so, perhaps, than at the big end of town, because there's a certain cultural element you can offer, from a small to medium or scale up. And one of the things that I think they do really well, and we're very conscious of it, by the way, is create a culture of informality and innovation, but that must sit alongside good HR governance. Because the HR governance piece is the bit that's going to keep the directors and business owners out of trouble. But you don't want to also lose that culture of informality and innovation. And we're very conscious about that when we work with our clients as well.
So what mechanisms or strategies can people put into place to be able to get that balance? Because it sounds like a great balance to have, but it might be difficult to get at times.
It can be, but I think psychological safety is a good place to start.
Okay.
And again, as I mentioned before, you can do a quick pulse check on that yourself, just with your own team. Are people speaking up? Do you feel like people are giving you everything they've got in terms of their ideas? Yeah. If you don't, maybe there's a reason why they're not speaking up, and hold up that mirror. Maybe you are the reason. Yeah. So look for those signs. So, as I said before, people should not be afraid to say, I don't know, I made a mistake, I could be wrong, I have a concern, I have an idea. If people aren't saying that to you, there may be something about the environment that you are perhaps inadvertently creating. Sometimes when I talk to people about, there's a particular assessment tool that we work with that we use across the whole employment life cycle, whether it's recruitment, but we also use it for leadership development and individual development. Okay. And I'll pick an example, one really common competency area that can get people, can impact relationships is communication. So there are people in this world who are very direct communicators, and there are people that really don't have a high tolerance for that. And when I'm debriefing someone whose leader or whose communication style is very direct, one of the things I will say to them is, do you feel like people shut down when they're talking to you? Because even though you may not be intending to come across that way, that is how you're coming across. And once again, as the leader, you need to change that experience. So, I think again, it all comes back to creating the right environment.
Yeah. It's a very strong
you need to know yourself. Yeah, and it definitely is. It actually is. And I know that is for me, because that relationship, and it's probably one of the reasons I got out of corporate career actually, was because I felt, certainly in the last couple of roles that I had, I felt that I was not operating in a psychologically safe environment where I was able to speak up, where I was able to say I could be wrong, where I was able to say I've got this great idea. And I just felt increasingly, maybe it was the companies I was working with or whatever, but I just felt that was just getting away from why I went into HR. So I set about to build a business that certainly creates that for my team and fosters and encourages it with our clients. And by the way, I will fire a client if that value is not there. And I've done that just once, but I have done that.
That's good to hear. So you're truly living your values. What I think is really fantastic about psychological safety is 2 years ago, it really wasn't talked about in the marketplace. It really wasn't. It wasn't really a term. I know, as you mentioned, Adam Grant talks about it a lot. But in the last, I would say, 6 months, it has been talked about nearly on a daily basis. So not only are people encouraging psychological safety in the workplace, in general in the world, people are being in an environment of psychological safety because it is being talked about so much. So the more we talk about it and the more we encourage it, and like you say, we follow those values in the people we choose to work with, it's really going to be implemented for the long term benefit of everybody.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it wasn't a term. I think it's probably always been there. We just haven't called it that before. And, I think once you start to refer to something as a term, you can start to, okay, I get that now. Let's make sure that we are looking at this in our feedback processes.
Yeah.
As we've done with ours. And as that board member said, imagine if I didn't have an answer to that. Imagine if I hadn't been able to go back and say, well, actually, this question, the responses to those questions all tell me that that's not a problem in your environment.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you see as the top priority in HR at the moment? If you could name just one thing, and how are you preparing yourself and your clients for that next normal?
Yeah, well, I think the big priority, certainly as a business partner to our clients, is around creating this environment that's going to differentiate them from other employers looking for their people. So, I mean, I know that's not that's not a simple thing to do. It is about getting insight. It is about asking for feedback, and it's critically about doing something about that feedback. Don't ask for feedback if you're not willing to do something about it. I think also, though, as a HR professional, what I think is really, really important right now is to stay current and to stay connected. And what I mean by that, I mentioned that I caught up with, one of my networks last night. And through that interaction, which was predominantly social, but I was able to find out about some stuff that they were doing in their workplaces that I thought, you know what, that might work in this client or across all of our clients. So I think it's really important to stay current on what's going on in our world as HR professionals. And one other way we do that, actually, interestingly, because we work with a wide range of clients, they're all quite diverse. We're industry agnostic, so we work across many industries. Just in the very fact of, or just engaging with them, they present us with challenges where we come up with solutions that will work for many clients. So we're able to tweak things a bit based on what we've seen work more effectively at another client. So that's what I mean about staying current both externally. So what's going on there in the HR space? What are you guys doing in your business that I can learn from and take back into my own? And I'm widely networked. I'm a huge believer in network and getting an external reference and bringing that into the business for the benefit of our clients. So I think staying connected and staying current is is how we are preparing ourselves as HR professionals to provide the best advice we can to our clients at this time and in fact beyond. I mean, this won't be around forever. It might be around for a while, but there will be another new normal.
Yeah.
That, where we're being required to provide advice. I've got no doubt about that.
Yeah, I think you're very right there. So with that being the top priority, my last question is really about then there are companies that are surviving, trying to survive. There are companies that are pivoting, and there are companies that are really looking to scale. What support can HR provide leaders and business owners and employers in general to really help them achieve that?
So again, you're not going to grow. There's three areas that we work in, and I think all three are equally important. So as I mentioned before, a common entry point for us is around this compliance piece. If you don't get that stuff right, you're not going to grow, or if you do grow, you'll find that you might end up, with a bigger focus on you as you grow, and if you haven't got that stuff right. So you need to get those basics right. Okay, that represents risk for business owners and directors if they're not operating in a compliant way. I think the second area is more around starting to then get into more of the cultural side. So the next two streams that we work in is really all about culture. So the second stream is creating the performance and career development program, providing team members with the opportunity to have those conversations, not once a year, maybe twice a year formally, but a continual conversation, okay, in order to keep them challenged and inspired and feeling valued. And then the third area is we provide quite a focus on developing leadership capability. So as businesses grow, the business owner can no longer manage through the personal touch. When you get beyond a period of growth, you just can't do that anymore. Yeah. You need to be able to delegate leadership to a trusted leadership team, a team of people who take leadership seriously and, may need to develop themselves around that. So I do a lot of this work personally around leadership development through firstly providing insight through the assessment tool that we work with. And then I don't actually do any one-to-one coaching. It's kind of in my toolkit, but I actually find in most cases, it's more beneficial for someone to work with an external coach and use me as a bit more of a sounding board. So that's a lot of the work that we do. So that focus has always been, that's always been the way that we've worked at Norgay HR. But I think in this current COVID climate, I think all of that work is still equally important. I think the focus on leadership is probably critically important because, again, it's only good leaders who can influence interpersonal relationships to get what we need out of those people. Okay, so you can't be a good leader without good interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And from personal experience, seeing the difference between courses are fantastic and they're amazing, but you tend to find you come back to reality after a course and you fall back into what you've always done. The value of a coach is that safe environment, it's confidential, it's judgment-free, you can be utterly vulnerable, you can look in the mirror and you can really figure out yourself by unearthing what you're thinking to come up with your own strategies. And it's so valuable. But you're right. I think the one thing that's been really clear in everything you've talked about, Claire, which has been amazing, is if I could sum it up, it really is bringing the human back into human resources. It's not having human resources as a policy or a tick box or the policing side of a business.
Yeah,
it's really bringing back what it truly should be, and it's about the human element.
I completely agree. I completely agree, and I would like to think that all of our clients experience that. And there are clients that we work with that have come out of those big corporate environments, and I can quickly pick up if they're bringing that baggage along with them when they start to talk to us about bringing us into their business. I've seemed to have a bit of a radar, maybe because I've had the same experience they've had in larger environments, and we'll do anything we can to prevent that sort of policing aspect coming into theirs. And the other aspect we prevent from coming in as well, we're not we're not the mother hens either. You know, good HR, good strategic HR advice can be difficult to hear, you know, and I think that's one of the benefits that I hadn't anticipated actually when I started the business. We're seen as being quite objective because we're not working within the business where we have the personal relationships that become friendships, and, you know, therefore we are seen to be quite objective. And we have not yet had a claim go all the way through Fair Work, because if something starts to go wrong, we can jump in pretty quickly. And I talk a lot about turning the heat down. So say there's an issue between a manager and a direct report, we can be pretty objective in advising both parties. Well, have you thought about it from their perspective? Did you think about this? You know, in the current environment, have you thought about what might be going on at home? We ask that a lot at the moment. Have you thought about what might be going on at home? You know, just introducing that different perspective, which is completely objective, completely non-judgmental, but it's there. I mean, we're always operating with the intent, a good intent from the business perspective and from the individual perspective. But, you know, sometimes what we say might not be that easy to hear.
Yeah, very true.
But our business owners and leaders, they expect that of us.
Yeah, absolutely agree. You mentioned before about baggage, and you know, you can see the red flags. What are those red flags that people need to be aware of? Because I'm sure that most people that go into the HR realm do it because they want to have that human element and really make a difference to people. But sometimes it does end up being the policing side of the business. So 2 questions. Why does it end up being quite a policing, I suppose, a policing, I'm trying to think of the right word. Why is it that people communicate it or describe it as a policing role? And how can people get the red flags that it's going down that path?
Yeah, okay, that's a really good question. I think, look, I haven't worked in large corporates for 6 or 7 years now, but I can talk about it from my own personal experience, because I was on the end of a very negative experience that actually saw me leave corporate and start my own business. So the policing side, you know, when HR became more about cost management, and you know, one of the red flags, for example, I know someone well who tells me this story. So you're doing, you know, you're cutting headcount, or you've got a headcount freeze. So how does this make any sense? So we've got a headcount freeze, yet we're a flexible work environment. So we're offering flexibility, but everyone on a flexible work arrangement is considered as a full-time equivalent, right? So in other words, that you're putting a headcount freeze, you've got flexible work in place, everyone is counted, if everyone on a flexible arrangement is counted as a full-time equivalent. So when you are allowed to hire someone, who are you going to hire? The person who's requiring flexibility, or the person who's happy to work full-time? So the inconsistencies, I think, in what we say and what we do are the red flags.
Right.
We're a flexible work environment, but you're only allowed to hire this many people. So even though we're going to provide flexibility and allow people to work, you know, not 40 hours a week or 20 hours a week, but something around, you know, something that's flexible, you can still only have one body do that. You can't have 2 people come in and make that the full-time equivalent.
Right.
I hope I explained that correctly.
Yes.
But it's you know, it's the what we say versus the what we do.
Yes.
They're the red flags.
Got it.
And it's you know, as I mentioned before, the sector that we work in, that they're not interested in the big bureaucratic HR model. They're not interested in that. And I think the thing too, and one of the things I love about this sector, I have not once had to walk into a leadership team and say why you need HR. Because when it's not going well, or when it's going wrong, they feel it every single day. You know, they're not working in a large organization where you can cover some stuff up. it can become such a distraction for a business owner or leader when something's not right about the people in their team or in their business. It's just not the same scope to cover it up or just get somebody else to do it. It just doesn't work that way.
So for all those small and medium businesses out there that might need the HR support, how can they get in contact with you?
Oh, my banners. So there's our contact details behind us there. So a few ways. So the first point of contact, team at norgayhrconsulting.com.au. We've got our phone number there. That's not that well. Here we go. If I shift a little bit, there we go.
Yep, perfect.
0291192266. That's the best way to get in touch with us initially. You can also jump onto our website, and there's an ability there to book some time with me personally if we just want to catch up for an introductory call, Zoom call.
Great.
It's all on Zoom these days.
People can connect with you on LinkedIn as well?
Of course, I'm sorry, obviously. Yes, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So do reach out to me via LinkedIn. I'd be really happy if people did, and we can certainly connect that way. I actually use LinkedIn a lot. I mentioned before about staying current and staying connected. I use LinkedIn a lot to post articles or things that I come across that I might actually have had a conversation at the beginning of the week, and I come across something, I'm like, you know what, this is exactly what we were talking about. So I do put a lot of articles up there and tag people that I've been speaking to say, this is what we were just talking about this week. So I use LinkedIn extensively.
Great. And what I'll make sure I'll do on this is I'll put the link so people have easy access to your website and to your LinkedIn page, both your company and personal, just to make it easy on everyone. Claire, thank you so much. That was it's really actually encouraging to hear that it's not just a one-off, it's multiple businesses are thinking and feeling the same. And I think it's relieving to know that we're all in the same boat together. But that probably my takeaway about the challenge, the inspiring, feeling valued, it really all does connect to the human being in the human resources. And it's a very encouraging point, even though it's an extremely tough environment we're in at the moment. It's also really encouraging because I feel that reprioritizing and refocusing on people is just, it's going to be accelerate business and people performance in the future.
Oh, I completely agree. It is a differentiator. Having a great team is a differentiator.
Absolutely. Thank you, Claire. I really appreciate it. Have a fantastic day.
Thanks so much. You too. Thank you, Vanessa.